Have you ever felt those deep, often hidden currents? The ones that shape your thoughts, your actions, maybe even your wildest dreams?
Mm.
Or wondered why certain stories, certain symbols seem to resonate across, well, everywhere, across cultures, across time?
It's a really profound mystery, isn't it? And for ages, people just didn't have the tools to explain these things. They were just inexplicable.
Right.
But then this new field, psychology, started to emerge, and it began offering some really revolutionary insights into the human mind.
And that's what we're diving into today. We're looking at the fascinating early psychological theories of C.G. Jung, especially from his foundational work, Psychology of the Unconscious.
It's an amazing text.
It really is. And it offers maybe a surprising shortcut to understanding some of the deepest drivers of, well, us, human behavior.
Yeah, we'll be digging into some detailed excerpts from it, trying to unpack Jung's initial, pretty groundbreaking ideas about the unconscious mind, his much broader take on libido compared to Freud.
That's a key difference.
Yeah. And the incredible power of symbolism and myth in his thinking.
So our mission here for this deep dive is basically to pull out the most important bits of knowledge for you. We want to show how psychology first started to explain things that seemed, unexplainable before.
Uh-huh.
And how these insights really connect to the fabric of your own experience, even right now today.
It really is remarkable when you think about it. This young field, psychology, it faced so much opposition, so much skepticism.
Fierce opposition, the source says.
Right. And yet it managed to develop an understanding of things that were just a complete mystery before. And it wasn't just about figuring out neuroses or why people acted certain way.
No, it went deeper.
Much deeper into understanding the products of the mind itself, like myths, religions. It was like putting on a completely new pair of glasses to look at reality.
But getting to those hidden meanings, it wasn't easy, was it? I mean, these early psychologists, they ran into this big problem. Patient resistance.
Oh, absolutely. A huge hurdle.
How did that, show up? What did it tell them about the unconscious?
Well, this resistance, it could manifest in all sorts of ways. Sometimes it was direct criticism of the therapist or the method.
Okay.
Other times it was a complete block. The patient just couldn't or wouldn't express certain things. Or it could even show up as physical symptoms.
Wow, physical.
Yeah. So the big challenge was finding ways around these resistances, ways to help patients revive these really disturbing, repressed memories and feelings that were clearly causing the trouble.
Even if the patient wasn't aware they were hiding anything.
Exactly. That was the key insight. Even if you're not consciously aware you're concealing some painful experience, those hidden bits are still active, still causing symptoms.
Which brings us to the unconscious itself. How did they define it back then?
It's actually quite simple, the basic definition. The unconscious is just all the material thoughts, feelings, memories that an individual isn't aware of at any given moment.
That simple definition holds so much power, though. But how did Freud actually start to access it? I mean, if it's unconscious, how do you get there? What was his big idea?
Well, faced with these repressed thoughts and feelings, Freud had this, brilliant idea. He shifted from looking at daydreams, which are closer to the surface, to really examining nightly dreams.
Okay, so focusing on sleep dreams.
Right. He wondered if dreams could shed light on those painful ideas and feelings that were pushed out of consciousness, the ones you just couldn't get to through direct questioning because of that resistance.
And what did he find?
It was revolutionary. He found that dreams, despite what everyone thought, are not just, quoting the source here, a fantastic and absurd jumble of heterogeneous fragments.
Which is how they often feel.
Exactly. But he argued they're actually packed with profound meaning. They have their own language, their own logic.
And that realization that even our weirdest dreams mean something, that must have led to one of psychology's most, almost unsettling ideas, that maybe nothing in our inner life is truly random.
That's right. Jung and Freud really hammered this home. They argued that fundamentally there is no such thing as chance in the psyche. Every thought, every slip of the tongue, a Freudian slip, right? Every dream image, it's all a clue. It points towards our deepest, often hidden feelings and wishes.
Every single act, every expression has meaning, determined by our inner world. Nothing is accidental. That's quite a statement.
It truly is. It's just a completely determined psychic world, in a way.
Okay, so if nothing is accidental, let's talk about the engine driving a lot of this inner world. Libido. Now, Freud initially brought up libido as this fundamental craving, almost like hunger, but rooted specifically in the sexual impulse, right?
That was Freud's initial formulation, yes. He saw it as the core psychic energy, fundamentally sexual in nature.
But Jung, he took that idea and ran with it in a different direction, didn't he? He saw something much broader.
He certainly did. That's one of the key places they diverged. Jung significantly widened the concept. He really refused to restrict libido only to sexual desire.
So what was it for him then?
He defined it more broadly, maybe more philosophically, as a manifestation of the will. Kind of in the sense the philosopher Schopenhauer used the term.
Yeah.
Like a fundamental life force, an energy, a drive.
Okay, so less specific than just sex drive.
Much less specific. The source gives that great classical example. Libido is sera.
Which means?
I will, it pleases me to know, or I have the desire to know. That kind of libido isn't sexual, it's the urge, the drive, the psychic energy pushing us towards knowing, achieving, creating. It goes way beyond just physical intimacy.
That wider definition of libido, that must have led to some pretty significant disagreements with Freud, especially about what causes psychological illness.
Absolutely, it was a crucial point of divergence. Jung, while he definitely acknowledged the influence of parents and a person's basic constitution.
Right, the background stuff.
Yeah. He didn't agree with Freud that the primary cause of later illness was always buried deep in the past, in childhood sexuality. Instead, Jung placed the cause of what he called pathogenic conflict squarely in the present moment.
In the person's current life situation and their struggles now.
Exactly. He even observed that constantly digging into the distant past often reflects the patient's own desire to withdraw from the challenges they're facing right now.
Almost like using the past to avoid the present. Interesting.
It can be, yeah. And this broader view of the mind also led Jung to make another really important distinction, this time about how we think. He identified two fundamental kinds of thinking.
Good.
First, there's what he called directed thinking. This is our conscious mind at work. It's adapted to reality. It's logical. It follows rules. It's the kind of thinking behind science, behind, planning your day or following a historical account, like the source mentions, the War of 1870-71.
So rational, focused, goal-oriented thought. That makes sense.
Precisely.
But you said two kinds. So while directed thinking is our logical problem-solving tool, Jung saw something else operating, something very different, maybe even more powerful.
Yes, exactly. He called the other kind dream or fantasy thinking, and it's completely undirected. It doesn't follow logical steps towards a goal.
Where does it come from then?
It just sort of flows from an inner source, constantly shifting, creating these plastic, now shadowy shapes, as the text puts it, very much like dreaming while awake.
Ah, okay. So it's subjective.
Highly subjective. It's fed by our own personal, often egotistic wishes, our fears, our hopes. And because of that, it can create a really distorted picture of the world, seen through the lens of those inner desires. Jung saw this as a more, infantile state of thinking.
Infantile, like primitive?
In a way, yes. He thought it lies not just in our own individual childhood past, but also connects back to the prehistoric past of humankind itself. It's an older way of processing the world.
And what's fascinating, the source points out how easily we flip between these two modes.
It takes almost nothing, right? Just a slight drop in interest, a bit of fatigue.
And boom, directed thinking stops and fantasies start drifting in.
Exactly. And if your attention slips even further, you can lose awareness of the present altogether. And fantasy just completely takes over, like daydreaming intensely.
And if you scale that idea up, this is where it gets really mind-blowing. Jung suggested that myths, ancient myths, legends, are essentially a mass dream of humanity.
Yeah.
And that our own individual fantasy thinking, our dreams, are like echoes, a re-echo of the prehistoric and the ancient. It really makes you wonder how much of our normal, everyday thinking isn't quite as directed as we assume.
How much is actually this undirected, dreamlike state bubbling up? It's a powerful thought, and it leads to another strong conclusion in the work. You can try to shield a child from specific old myths, maybe think they're outdated.
But you can't take away the need for mythology itself.
Precisely. The source is very clear on this. If you could somehow cut off all traditions, all stories, the whole mythology and history of religion would start over again with the very next generation. It's presented as an innate, unavoidable human need, hardwired.
Which brings us right to symbolism. Because if we have this deep need for myth, and this undirected fantasy thinking is always active, then symbolism is how it speaks.
Right,
That's what-
absolutely. Symbolism is the natural language of this archaic, undirected thinking. The kind of thinking that Jung says once ruled as the mightiest influence in past culture epochs. It's how the unconscious communicates, through images, through symbols.
And these symbols aren't just random personal things, are they? He talks about universal symbols.
Yes, symbols that seem to resonate across cultures. Take the phallus, for example. In this symbolic language, it's not just the physical organ. It represents the quintessence of life and fruitfulness.
The life force itself.
Exactly, the source of life and libido, a great creator and worker of miracles. It was revered in many ancient cultures.
What else? Sun and fire?
Sun and fire are huge ones. Often direct comparisons or analogies for the libido, for that intense life energy. They also often symbolize God, divinity, love. The source mentions a hymn of creation praising God the Creator, and also a poem about a moth drawn to the sun.
Linking that fiery longing to our longing for God.
Precisely, that same intense, consuming energy.
And then there are mythical heroes. How do they fit in?
Jung sees them often as personifications of the human libido itself and the typical journeys or fates that libido undergoes. He mentions Faust's key or even tiny heroes like Tom Thumb as potentially representing this phallic, driving libido energy.
Okay. And the serpent or the dragon, that seems like a really common one.
It is, and it's incredibly multifaceted. On one hand, it can definitely have that phallic significance, life, fruitfulness, energy,
Okay.
but it can also represent repressed things, like the repressed sexuality of youth, or for older people, perhaps the repressed thought of death. And very importantly, Jung links it to resistance against the incestuous desire, which we need to unpack carefully.
Right, because incestuous desire takes on a very specific meaning here.
Mm.
But before we get to that, it's just amazing how one symbol, the serpent, can hold so many, sometimes conflicting meanings.
It shows the richness and complexity of the symbolic language. And just to touch on the raw emotional power of this libido energy, the source brings up that poem, Monk's The Maiden's First Love Song.
How does that illustrate it?
It portrays love, or this emerging libido, as this almost frighteningly powerful blind force. It leaps, it coils, it causes both pity or delight, and this deep physical shuddering. It's not gentle, it's intense, overwhelming.
Okay, so with that intensity in mind, let's get back to that tricky concept.
Yeah.
Incestuous desire. Jung reinterprets this in a really surprising way, doesn't he? It's not about literal incest.
Not primarily, no. He argues that the fundamental basis of this symbolic incestuous desire isn't about cohabitation. It's about something deeper, the special thought of becoming a child again.
Wanting to go back.
Yes, wanting to return to the safety, the protection of the parent, specifically the mother. It's a powerful regressive pull. And because this urge is unacceptable to the conscious mind, it gets repressed.
And then expressed symbolically.
Expressed symbolically as the idea of individual rebirth from the mother, needing to be born again, but this time perhaps born into true independence.
Which leads straight into the symbolism of the mother herself. She has this dual role, right?
Very much so. On one side, she's the positive archetype, the source, the inexhaustible source of life for the creator, representing nurturing, origin, safety, potential.
The good mother.
The good mother, yes. But then there's the other side, especially for the person Jung describes as cowardly, timid, and sluggish, someone afraid to face life's challenges.
For them, the mother becomes.
She transforms into the terrible mother, or the dreadful mother, symbolized by devouring monsters, the whale dragon that swallows the hero, the voracious jaws of death.
Wow, so it represents the fear of being sucked back.
Exactly. The fear of being devoured by that regressive pull, paralyzed by the consuming poison of the stealthy retrospective longing. It's the danger of staying stuck in dependency, never achieving your own life.
And that battle against the dreadful mother connects directly to the hero's journey myth, which Jung sees everywhere.
Yes, he interprets the hero's journey as a symbolic battle for deliverance from this regressive pull. It often involves challenges related to the mother archetype in its negative form.
Like the night journey on the sea, being swallowed by a monster.
Precisely, being devoured by a water monster. This whole journey to the underworld that heroes often take, it looks like death, but symbolically, Jung says, it's actually a fountain of youth.
How so?
Because from that apparent death, that confrontation with the unconscious depths, new life, new fertility can spring. The hero has to conquer the dreadful mother, symbolically speaking,
To overcome those inner fears and regressions.
and gain a new, more independent life. The The source says the infantile hero within us must symbolically die, meaning we have to sever those childhood dependencies, those fetters, to really live.
That psychological lens, applying it to myths, is powerful.
Mm.
And Jung extends it to understand the origins of major religions too, doesn't he?
He does, looking at religions like Christianity and Mithraism, particularly as they arose in the Roman Empire.
Which was a time of intense
Chaos.
Okay.
The source describes ancient Rome experiencing whirlwinds of the unchained libido, just fierce brutality and instinct run wild. Jung's analysis suggests these religions emerged partly as moral restraints against those overwhelming animal impulses.
Offering structure and meaning in the chaos.
And crucially, offering an enormous feeling of redemption, a sense of protection against the visible storms of wickedness raging outside and perhaps inside people, too.
He even connects baptism to this rebirth theme.
Yes, seeing baptism as a symbolic rebirth, but through the second mother, maybe the church, or symbolically the mysterious tree of death, connecting death and new life.
It's incredible how these deep psychological patterns seem to manifest in these huge cultural structures. And it brings it back to something you mentioned earlier, Jung's observation about the burdens we place on ourselves.
Right, that idea that humanity creates tremendous and unnecessary burdens for itself. Through overly rigid intellectual views and moral formulas, basically boxing ourselves in, and also through our deep inability to admit to himself that he is actually just a human being imperfect.
Trying to be more than human, essentially.
Yeah, striving for some impossible perfection, denying our own messy, complex nature. And this denial, this rigidity, creates these profound internal conflicts that then play out through all these symbolic dramas we've been talking about.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've journeyed through Jung's early ideas on the unconscious, his much broader concept of libido, the pervasive language of symbolism, the power of myth, and this archetypal hero's journey within us.
And hopefully you can see how these threads aren't separate. They're deeply woven together. They all describe different facets of how our psyche works, how it shapes our experience.
And what's really striking, I think, is that these patterns, which Jung was uncovering by looking at myths and dreams and patients over a century ago, they're still incredibly relevant. They continue to influence us right now.
Absolutely. They're often operating just beneath the surface, in the shadows of the unconscious. Our dreams, our deep desires, our struggles to grow and become independent, even the stories we find ourselves drawn to, they're all echoing these fundamental dynamics.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's maybe a final thought to leave you with, something to mull over.
Consider this. If our unconscious really does express its deepest needs, its desires, its conflicts through this potent symbolic language we've been exploring, then how much of what we call our everyday reality, our thoughts, feelings, choices, relationships, is actually a reflection or maybe even a kind of disguise for that deeper, unacknowledged inner world?
That's a big question. And maybe how could recognizing these hidden currents, these powerful drives, these symbols playing out within us, adapting of growing in our own lives?
Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about until our next deep dive.